Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fourth leadership series of Bridging the Gap. And before we begin, it is our distinct privilege to welcome to the stage the president of Spartanburg Community College, who's going to give you a grand welcome, and then we're going to get started. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Henry Giles.
Boy, if I could have that welcome in a faculty meeting, I'd be in great shape. Thank y'all for being here. Thank you for being a part of this event today. Having a presidential candidate here in Spartanburg is wonderful, and I have to say having one at Spartanburg Community College in a building that has been dedicated for education for almost 100 years is wonderful. This building was built in 1922. I have to give you a little spiel. It was originally built as Evans High School to serve the city of Spartanburg. The addition you see at your left was added in 1928, and the school became Spartanburg High School. Served as Spartanburg High School to 1959. They built the current Spartanburg High School. This became Evans Junior High for 20 years, and then in 1979 the county bought the building and made a human services facility out of it. And then about 4 years ago the college was able to obtain it, and the building has gone through a full restoration in the spirit of trying to make people that went to school here feel at home when they come back, make them feel like that they're back in their high school. So that's why you have the hardback seats. I apologize for that, but that's part of it. So thank you for being here. This is a college facility, and we want this facility to be used as a community facility for Spartanburg. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just kind of curious, anyone ever attend school here? Yay, we got a couple of hands, 3 or 4 hands, 5 hands, that's awfully interesting. So welcome back is what I would say. Just a few housekeeping. I'd like to recognize our auditor, Sharon West. Sharon, if you can just give a quick stand. Henry Giles, of course, who you've just met, president of Spartanburg Community College. Ricky and Joy Maccabee really helped us out today with the Republican Party-sponsored brunch that many of you chirped in my ear and said it was fabulous. So thank you both so very, very much. Jane Hall, Spartanburg County Council. Our newest elected chairman of Spartanburg County Council, Bill Conley. Give us stand up. And I always tease him, my pastor, Mike Hamlet, pastor of First Baptist North Spartanburg. I'm the only Presbyterian with a Baptist minister, so I love this man. And of course, Daniel Santorum, who happens to be a Citadel at the Cadet, where Ernie's going to go next year, and he's traveling with his dad, and I told him to keep a special eye out for our son. So welcome to Spartanburg. I'd like to also thank Alexa Newman, who always puts us on, my great girlfriend, and Jan Baxley. Jan, stand up. Jan's going to be our timekeeper. Many of you have heard from Jan. She's been the one to kind of coordinate the nuts and bolts. Thank you, Jan. And then the woman that founded this with me and actually goes to more of these events and frankly is the spirit behind Palladian View, Betty Poe. Betty, stand up. She won't stand up. She's too. Thank you, Betty. So briefly, Palladian View was born to empower women in the political world, and what we learned was that women constitute 53% of the electorate, and yet we don't typically vote or become engaged. And through the process these last 5 years, we also found that there is not really a gender distinction. 83% of all Americans are truly disenfranchised with the political process. And the purpose really for Palladian View is to bring tremendous candidates like our very own Senator Rick Santorum and actually let them talk about the issues, and you all formulate informed opinions and then hopefully get behind the candidates that you legitimately are called to support. And so we are here today with our 6 panelists, and I'm going to go quickly over the ground rules. Then I'm going to introduce Senator Santorum. We'll go into his remarks. He can talk for as long as he'd like. What we found is that the shorter the remarks, the more opportunity for Q&A, and it's to you, sir. And I'm going to begin today with my privilege of introducing this wonderful panel. Representative Rita Allison absolutely needs no introduction. The only Republican woman to serve as a chairman in the House legislature, 17 years in the legislature, a successful small business owner, married to Ron with a daughter and grandchildren, really typifies what a Republican conservative should be. Representative Allison. Alan Smith, President and CEO of Spartanburg Area Chamber of Commerce. We fundamentally believe that business has a very strong role in vetting candidates, listening to candidates, formulating issues, and he has been an incredible adjunct and support to each of these forums, and we certainly appreciated his passion, perspective, and I can tell you prior to serving as our current CEO and president here at Spartanburg, he was that of Greater Greer Chamber, and he's also a graduate of East Carolina University. We have Gordon Dill, an investigative reporter at WSPA. Whoops, I flipped over. Sorry about that, Gordon. He's covered upstate politics for 15 years, anchors 7 on Your Side, weeknights. He owes everything to his wife and 2 awesome daughters. And then Ben, I'm going to not miss you. Here you go. There's Ben Hill, morning anchor on Fox Carolina, served internships with NBC Nightly News, has done a tremendous job. His wife served as an internship for First Lady Laura Bush in the White House. He studied journalism, political science at Western Kentucky, and is a diehard Kentucky basketball fan. Woo! Beth Brotherton kind of squeezed in there. Beth, welcome. Reporter with WYFF News 4, anchors News 4 Today at 4:30 weekdays. Grew up in Zambia as the child of a missionary. Studied broadcast journalism at the University of Illinois. And finally, our very own print guy, Michael Smith, executive editor of Spartanburg Herald Journal, over Newsom administrations and opinion. And I got to tell you, we are so privileged that you all come to these, vet candidates, listen to issues, and we will continue going on. Again, this is our 4th, and at the rate we're going, we'll have 16 of these. So we've got a lot of opportunity ahead, and we're very grateful. Just gets better, yeah. So very simple format. Kind of a round table. Keep up the pace. We've got Jan, who's got literally a time clock, and what she's going to do is make certain that we can get through lots of questions by kind of, and this is what we were talking about with Senator Santorum earlier, it keeps you very, very concise, and so we get lots of information out. And finally, it is my distinct privilege to introduce to you Senator Rick Santorum, and let me tell you a little bit about him. All of these wonderful folks that are going to be participating in these series have, descriptors, and the descriptor that I hear more than anything of Rick Santorum is perseverance and passion. And this man has carried the conservative torch literally for our nation. He is a co-founder of Patriots Voices, a grassroots and online community of Americans from across the country. And I saw Larry Bateman with a t-shirt. Turn around so everyone can see that t-shirt. There you go, Patriot Voices. Go Patriot Voices! It's literally working across the country, committed to restoring the American dream of hardworking families. It was formed following Senator Santorum's run for president in 2012 and serves as a place for conservatives to join voices and be heard on many issues facing our country. Senator Santorum, along with his wife Karen, have co-authored a new book entitled Bella's Gift. Many of you know Bella from the stories and from Senator Santorum. A child born special and beautiful in her unique ways, and just this book itself, it's entitled How One Little Girl Transformed Our Family and Inspired a Nation. and it chronicles this young lady's inspiring life. Rick and Karen have been married for 24 years, are the parents of 7 wonderful children, and Elizabeth, John, Daniel, Sarah, Maria, Peter, Patrick, and Isabella. Prior to running for the president, Rick served as U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate. Ladies and gentlemen, please let's do a nice Spartanburg welcome for Senator Rick Santorum.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that very kind introduction, and also the remarks to try to keep my remarks brief. Also knowing that people who are going to write about me and cover me on television are standing behind me and want to get at me will shorten my remarks too, just to be respectful there. Let me finish the introductions. You met my son Daniel, but I have another son who's also at the Citadel. We have 2 at the Citadel. My son John, who is actually finishing up. He has a test this morning, otherwise he would have been here. But he is laboring away, and he's going into a senior year next year. So we're very, very excited about I'm very excited. Karen and I are very excited to be Citadel moms and dads, and just very much love being part of that fraternity down there. It's a very, very special place. I also want to talk about Bella for a second. She is going to be celebrating her 7th birthday next week, which is just a miracle. I mean, this is a little girl who was born with a condition called trisomy 18, which, if you look up the literature, says incompatible with life. And she is a testament to a love of a mother who wouldn't give up, which the book talks about, but to the power of prayer. I mean, Bella, in many respects, should never be here. She's gone through a whole lot of difficult things, but prayer was an amazing. For someone who believes in prayer, to see it in action like that was just a powerful affirmation to me, and something that what I always say in my speeches, that we always need to continue to pray for America, because prayer does work. And as much as I think people are concerned about the direction of this country, that a country that continues to pray and ask for God's blessing is a very important part of the success of this country. One final point I'll make, and then just open it up. I haven't made any announcements yet, although we're getting closer and closer to that time. I just want to share with you that yes, there are challenges in this country right now, and this is in many respects a critical time in our culture. If you look at religious liberty, for example, in America, and you see it for the first time in the history of our country under direct assault, people of faith, not just pastors, but people in their businesses. You saw in the Supreme Court argument the other day that the Solicitor General of the United States said that if the court rules a particular way on this marriage issue, that they can't say that faith-based organizations won't lose their tax-exempt status, that they won't be prosecuted by courts. They couldn't say that. And it's happening. It's happening in our business communities. It's happening in our churches. People are losing jobs right now because of this. This is a brand new thing in America. Never seen this in the history of our country. It's a challenge, but at the same time, it's an opportunity for us to understand how important faith is in our lives, and how important religious liberty is for our country to continue to be great. So what is a challenge also can be an opportunity for a revitalization and an understanding of how critical this aspect of life is in America. And so I look at all of these things, whether it's the sluggish economy, and the fact that we see people struggling, particularly hollowing out of the middle of America. I see that as an opportunity again to paint a positive forward-looking vision as to how we're going to take the 74% of Americans who don't have a college degree, whether a community college degree, don't have a college degree. 74% of working Americans don't have a college degree. What programs or what ideas and what vision can we cast that's going to give them some hope that life is going to get better? Because right now they don't feel that way. So as tough as things are, it presents an opportunity for us to lay out a positive, hopeful vision for this country and talk about the things that made us great. Talk about the things that are important for us to be a successful society going forward for all Americans. So with this great challenge comes this great opportunity. great opportunity to paint a vision, to try to do something that this country desperately needs. And that is to be hopeful and reunited. If there's anything I hear, final comment, anything I hear is that people are tired of the divisiveness and the rancor and the anger and the division. You hear it even within our own Republican Party. They want a message that can be unifying, that can bring Americans together for a better and hopeful future. And I wrote this book last year called Blue Collar Conservative, and I laid out that vision very, very clearly as a message that can unite the left and the right on issues of manufacturing and family and construction and trade and all these issues, immigration, that can bring us together to provide a hopeful vision for those who feel alienated and left behind by society. And people ask me, why are you thinking about running? That's it. Because if we can pull this country together, there is nothing America can't do. Thank you all very much.
So Representative Allison, who's actually serves as the executive director of Palladian View and really formulated this process, I'm going to begin with you with the first question, and then from there we'll work down the panel. Representative Allison.
Very good, thank you. Senator Santorum, it is a pleasure to have you here in Spartanburg. We thank you for coming and being a part of this. You know, it has been said that education is the engine and one of the things that drives our quality of life. And it seems that each administration seems to bring their own silver bullet with them. We've gone from No Child Left Behind to Common Core, and with all that comes monies from the feds, but strings are tied. I'd be very interested in knowing your stand and what your stand would be on our education system in this nation so that states can continue to do the work that they do in providing a good quality education for students in their states.
Thank you, Rita. I have a lot to say about education, but I'm saying it not as you can imagine, which maybe a lot of the other candidates in this race. What I've seen from Republicans is that Republican governors who come and want to be president want to be governor of the United States. And I say that because a lot of these folks, if you're a governor, look at your governor, spend a lot of time working on education, because that's one of the biggest things the state government does education. And so these governors get elected and they come to Washington and think, okay, all these things worked in my state, so I'm going to push them through on the federal level. Wrong. Wrong. The idea that the federal government needs to be involved in education was wrong-headed to begin with. And it is shown that it has not improved the quality of education. I mean, there just isn't any metric you can look at that has suggested that federal government involvement in education has been a benefit. And, you know, I learned my lesson. Common Core, I've been against Common Core from the very, very beginning. It was, to me, the idea that the problem in America is that we need the elites telling us what our education standards should be. And then, of course, once you have education standards, you're going to have tests to meet those standards. And the last thing we need is a top-down approach to how we educate our children. And so I've been against Common Core from the very, very beginning. What we need to look at is an understanding that the principal problem confronting education today is not education standards. It is a lack of parents preparing and involving themselves and their children in the educational enterprise. I've talked to, I can't even tell you the number, and when I say that, you know, I'm a conservative, and I'm very clear about, you know, I'm in favor of school choice. I'm in favor of charter schools. I'm in favor of competition in schools. But when I identify the real problem that's confronting this country on education is really starts in the family. you connect with teachers, you connect with administrators, because they see it, they feel it. They know that if you're coming from a family that values education that forms that child to appreciate the value of education and supports that child in the educational enterprise, I don't care what economic strata you come from, your child's going to do well. And if that doesn't happen in the home, some children will do well, but a lot lower percentage. And that is an issue that I sometimes sympathize with teachers and administrators, particularly in failing schools, because most of those failing schools have families that are failing. And there's been 2 books, I talk about this everywhere I go, 2 books written recently about education, about the importance of education. One on the far left by Robert Putnam, one on the far right by Charles Murray, who's a libertarian. And they both come down to the same thing, that the value of education is paramount and that the principal problem is the family. And unless we begin to nurture and create an environment where we can re-knit the American family, people say it's impossible. Nothing's impossible. We have set expectations as a culture that say men don't have to take responsibility for their children. The government makes it almost impossible for lower income women to marry the husband, the father of their children, because benefits go away if you do marry. We have created an atmosphere where families can't form. We can change that atmosphere.
Senator, welcome to Spartanburg. Happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Hope you spend a lot of money while you're here.
I'm off to a good start.
Good. A big difference between a manager and a leader is a manager thinks about what's going to happen tomorrow. Leaders thinking about what's going to happen 25 years from now. Let's fast forward and assume Rick Santorum becomes president. What does America look like in 2040, 2050?
One of the things that I'm working on right now is a really comprehensive economic plan that looks at how we can level the playing field and compete globally on issues of energy, particularly manufacturing. Well, you see it here in Greenville, Spartanburg. I mean, what has manufacturing done to this community? Manufacturing has a multiplier effect like no other industry. It creates good paying jobs. It creates an opportunity for those 74% that don't have a college degree to go get technical training. You have a great technical training, and here at your community colleges and other places for people to get the skills necessary to upgrade their skills. So you're providing a pathway up. And manufacturing does that better than anything else. And the reason we haven't been able to compete in manufacturing is because we haven't looked specifically at how we address the global disadvantages we have versus Mexico and China and other places. And so I'm working with a group of economists right now, and we're going to come forth with a plan that really does level that playing field and say, Made in America isn't a slogan anymore, it's going to be a reality. And so if we can accomplish that, if we can accomplish this level playing field that allows businesses to move their production back here to this country, it's going to benefit primarily the areas in America that are hurting the most. And if you go around and look at America and look at the unemployment rates and look at the problems economically, it's not in the cities and suburban areas of America. Those areas are doing very, very well, thank you very much. Now, you have some inner urban core problems, but most of the areas that have high rates of unemployment are small town and rural America. Those places are shrinking. Everybody's moving into the cities. Why? Because there are no jobs. Why? Because the manufacturing and processing jobs left, and with them the opportunities to be able to raise your family. We can create opportunities in small town and rural America again, which I think will be a very, very beneficial thing for this country. And so that's one vision of America. The second one, as I talked about earlier, everybody in this room knows all about global warming, or excuse me, climate change. And why? Because we had a president and leaders in our communities highlight that as an issue. Has anything been done concrete on global climate change in our legislative process? Little to nothing. But yet, it is a high priority and things are happening. Why? Because everyone has participated in it and decided that this is a priority for them. Now imagine if you had a president who said the priority is reknitting the American family, raising up the importance of fatherhood and marriage as the best way to build a healthy and good society. And actually, not just changing laws, but changing the attitudes in the business community, in our schools, and talking about this is a priority for America to create healthy families again in America. You know that that 40%, over 50% of American kids are going to grow up, who are born today, are going to grow up without a father in the home for some extended period of time in there. That is, and what are the results of that? Go to the neighborhoods where there are no dads. You know where you'll see them? In Baltimore. You go and look at those kids in Baltimore and you see how many of those dads were there. You saw a mom come and bring their kids back. How many dads did you see? They're not there. And as long as we have societies without dads, we're going to have gangs, and we're going to have single moms struggling heroically to try to control the forces that are making things very difficult for their kids. That is not a healthy America. That's not fair to moms, and it's letting dads off the hook. I mean, when you can go on Sean Hannity and talk about how proud you are that you've sired 20 kids to 20 different women, that is not a healthy America. That can change, and it takes leadership. So you want to talk about a vision? You talk about a vision that says you have opportunities from the bottom up to rise, and you have healthier families and communities as a result of that. That's a pretty positive vision going forward.
Senator, thanks for your time this morning. You supported the invasion of Iraq back in 2003, and many agree that removing Saddam was obviously a good thing. Now, though, unfortunately, after withdrawing several troops from that area, it's really become a breeding ground for extremists, mainly ISIS. Obviously, hindsight is 2020. Many, though, said keeping troops there is not something we could endure for several years. The loss of blood and treasure has been great. So, in short, what's the answer for the Middle East, specifically in Iraq?
At the time the president was negotiating the status of forces agreement with the Iraqi government, I was very, very outspoken, saying we have to negotiate that agreement. We have to keep our troops there. So much has been invested in creating a stable Iraq that by removing that, it was very clear to me and everybody else who had studied this that Iran was having increasing influence there, that with Iran having increasing influence and the current government being very Shiite-oriented, that the Sunnis in the Anbar and other places were becoming disaffected again, and that with the United States leaving, we were the link. We were the ones that were making that, forcing that relationship to work, that if we left would disintegrate into a sectarian divide. We said that to the president. We pleaded with the president, but the president wanted everybody's out by the election announcement and put politics ahead of what is in the security interests of our country. And what happened as a result was exactly what every one of us predicted, that there would be a sectarian divide. You know, I know some people in this room have had cancer, and when you have cancer and you get rid of it and you have a, quote, cure, the last thing you want is for that cancer to come back, because when that cancer comes back, in all likelihood, it's going to be a lot worse than that first cancer. It's always more virulent. People know that. The same thing. You cut off the head of that snake, and if that snake comes back, I'm telling you, and that's what's happened. You have the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Egyptians crushed the Muslim Brotherhood for a while, and what came out was Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was horrible, but we crushed it. What came out? ISIS. I mean, every time, every iteration, let me assure you, it's going to get worse. You think it can't be worse than ISIS? It can be worse than ISIS, but ISIS is pretty bad right now, and what you see going on there, and our response to it has been disgraceful. Christians are being crucified. They're being burned to death, and we won't even identify them as Christians as they're beheaded. We have taken an approach where the ancient church is being wiped out, and we are sitting by watching it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go back in history someday in 10, 20 years from now. You're going to look back at this time, and you're going to see the elimination of the ancient church in the Middle East. And you're going to say, what did you do while this happened? What did you do? And the answer is, we did nothing. And very few politicians even talk about it. This is the persecution of Christians is a direct result of the policies of this administration creating ISIS. And our inability to recognize that ISIS is not just a rogue group of people, but they're jihadists. They are motivated by religion. They are strict followers of it. They are trying to apply 7th century Islamic traditions to the world today. And to deny that this is the reality makes the decisions that you're making based on something that's not real. And so I don't know if you know this or not, but a few weeks ago, ISIS had they have an online magazine. They're very sophisticated, they're not living in caves. This is a nation state now. They have communications, they have sophistication, they have oil production. I mean, this is an operating state. And they have communications, and they have an online magazine. And in that online magazine was an article said, "In the words of our enemy." And the first person in that article was me. They had a picture of me, and a quote from me. Now, I will tell you that President Obama's name wasn't listed under "In the words of our enemy," because I went out there and told the truth about them. And I said, here's who this enemy is. What the president is doing in confronting ISIS is allowing them and encouraging them to expand their caliphate. He is not trying to defeat them. They have established a caliphate. What does that mean? They have a geographic area which they control, and they have established an Islamic state. Why is that important? Because in order to draw jihadists from America or from Britain or from China to come and help there, or to do jihadist activity in their native country, you have to have a territory of ground that you control. This is Islamic law. You can't establish a caliphate without controlling a state. They now control a state, so that gives them the legitimacy to call people to jihad. And by doing so, by allowing them to continue to control that land, particularly the Iraqi portion of that, which was the beginning part, we strengthen their hand in spreading jihad. So when you see a president who is not serious about winning, who flies sorties 5, 6, 7 a day, and 70% of them don't drop any ordnance, you have a president who's not serious about defeating the enemy. He refuses to deploy any troops to help the Kurds and Iraqis and Jordanians who want to fight. He won't provide weapons to the Kurds who need them to counteract he's not trying to win. All he's doing is, for public relations, is saying, I'm trying. But he's not trying to win. And as long as they hold on to that land, and the longer they do, the more powerful they'll be, and the more attacks you're going to see here in this country.
Senator, you've done this before, you've run before, and as you make a decision and go through the process of whether or not to run again, you know the financial strain, the emotional strain, the time on the road, the physical strain. As somebody who's done this before and had to pull out of the race, how do you mentally psych yourself up to go at this again? It seems like there would have to be some sort of mental battle to decide, is this worth it? Am I up to this? What is it going to take this time around? And what happens if I'm not ultimately successful?
You know, one of my favorite quotes is a quote by Mother Teresa. God doesn't call on you to be successful, He calls on you to be faithful. And I always felt like you can't run for president if it's about you. If it's about you, you shouldn't run. That you have to run because you feel like this is what you feel like you're being called to do to serve your country. And obviously you could hear some of the passion in my voice when it comes to these issues. I think our country's in a very precarious time. But as you heard me say earlier, I think with proper leadership, we've had such poor leadership, such divisive leadership, such feckless leadership on the national stage. This country deserves better than that. And I feel like that when you look at that devoid of leadership, and you look at the principles that need to be articulated for us to be successful again, I just feel like we need to go out there and articulate those. As much as people say, oh, well, you know, all these folks who are looking, a lot of them look the same. I would say that we talk about a lot of things that people don't talk about. I mean, some of the conversations just had here today on the economic side, that's not the message that the Republican Party is delivering. And I think as a result of that, I think it's going to be very hard to bring the country together on an economic plan that that people can get behind and be excited about. I think the issues of the family are really important. You don't see too many folks. I mean, it's an issue that people feel uncomfortable with. We don't want to be judgmental. It has nothing to do with judgmental. This has to do with the family being the basic economic building block of the country, of society, and that we need to make it healthier. And if you really, I say to my libertarian and moderate friends, if you don't have a strong family, you're not going to have limited government. It's just impossible. The family isn't strong. The government's going to be there either voluntary or involuntary to pick up the pieces, and it's going to cost a lot of money. And so having someone who has that, I think, very different perspective is what's pulling me. And the same thing on the international front. Everyone talks about those crushing sanctions that were put on Iran that brought them to the table. Most of those crushing sanctions I introduced and passed when I was in the Senate. Because back in 2004, this is right during the height of the Iraq War, I was saying really the big problem is not Iraq, it's Iran. And their nuclear program is a much bigger threat. And I was introducing bills on Iran to put sanctions on them to try to stop them from getting their nuclear program back when no one else was even talking about Iran. And again, that kind of, you ask, what's the country going to look like? Well, go back and look what people were talking about 10 years ago and whether they were right in pointing out the problems that are going to confront this nation going forward. And 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I was talking about a nuclear Iran as being the principal threat to our country. I don't think anyone would suggest right now that it's not. And yet, we talked about that then. I talked about religious liberty. Everyone's talking about religious liberty and how it's under threat right now. You'll hear every presidential candidate come and talk about it now. I was talking about it in 2003. Not with this court decision, but with a court decision that was the basis for all these other court decisions. I said, the court decides this wrong. I made this comment before, and Lawrence versus Texas was the case. I said, we're going to see a change in marriage. You're going to see religious liberty under assault. I was pleading with the court not to do this. And then immediately went to my colleagues and said, we have to defend marriage. If we don't defend marriage now, after this decision, and the decision had nothing to do with marriage, by the way, had nothing to do with marriage, at least on the face of it. But I saw how that decision was going to change marriage. And I said, we need to pass a constitutional amendment to define marriage before the courts go about changing it based on this decision. And they all thought I was crazy. And people said, oh, come on, you're one of these folks who's crying wolf, this is never going to happen. And so I said, it is, and I pushed and pushed and actually forced a vote on a constitutional amendment for marriage. It's the only time it was ever voted on because I forced it. I was in the leadership, I could do that. And we got a vote on marriage, we lost. But there's never been another vote on marriage since I left the Senate. And what's happened? Exactly what I predicted, both on the marriage side and on the religious liberty side. So it's not just what your vision is going to be, but what was your vision when things were happening and others didn't see it and you did. And I think that's something, you can judge someone's vision for the future based on what their vision was in the past and whether those issues came up that you projected that were going to be issues.
Senator, again, thank you for coming. I want to join that chorus. You mentioned fathers who aren't at home, and you even mentioned the city of Baltimore. A lot of those fathers don't just leave, they go to jail. This country locks up more people than any other country in the world. It's not China, it's not Russia, it's the United States. How do we solve this issue of mass incarceration and the issue of putting people back to work once they've served their time? Because when they come out of jail, they're not eligible for hire.
Yeah, I've actually been very open to ideas. A lot of them are happening at the state level right now, and looking at some of these mandatory sentencing, particularly on nonviolent drug crimes, and have expressed a willingness. Look, I voted for a lot of those on the federal level way back in the 90s when it was fashionable to do so, and I would say that we need to relook at those at the federal level. That's not the biggest problem. Most of them are state. Most of these are state incarcerations, not federal incarcerations. But the states are looking at that. Even some conservative states like Texas, for example, is doing a lot of judicial reform. I think we need to do that. I think we need to see whether these sentences are too harsh, too long. And having said that, America is a lot safer. Crime rates are much lower now than they've been in a long, long time. So it's a balancing act. You can say, well, it's ended up with too many people in jail. That's true. I would agree with that. And in particular, it certainly has skewed more toward the minority community. That's no question about that. But at the same time, you can also say crime rates have gone down. So you want to balance. You don't want to fix one and then create another problem, right? By seeing crime rise again and people feeling less safe. So I think we have to be very deliberate about how we do this, and but I think we need to begin down that road. The second thing I voted for when I was in the Senate was allowing folks who were convicted of felonies, who've served their time, out their parole, and are now completely free from the criminal justice system. I voted for that 5 years after that, if you haven't have no other problems, that you should get your voting rights restored. And I have to say, I was somewhat disillusioned by in the last campaign when one of my opponents, who will go nameless, who had a lot of money, was running ads against me, saying that Rick Santorum wanted felons to vote and had people in jail in orange jumpsuits on the TV screen saying Rick Santorum wanted felons to vote. No, Rick Santorum wanted people who had served their time, done their time, paid their debts to society, and had proven to be clean for 5 years to get their rights back as a citizen. And I think those are the kinds of things that we need to look at to encourage people back into society and understand that people make mistakes, and if they reform, then we're going to accept them back fully into economic and political life in America.
Expand on that a little bit. You said in answer to Alan's question that if the president made healthy families a priority and addressed missing fathers, how does a president do that? What kind of programs do you institute? What is the role of the federal government in that kind of social change?
Well, the social change is happening, Mike. I mean, it's happening dramatically. So the question is, can you abate that social change and, in fact, begin to turn it back in a positive direction? I mean, again, I don't think there's any debate anymore. I mean, Daniel Patrick Moynihan did his study back in the 1960s talking about the black family and was castigated for doing so. But now you have the Center for American Progress, which is the left, the hard left political group, who's now saying, in USA Today a week ago, 10 days ago, saying that they have to start focusing on rebuilding the American family. You have Robert Putnam, a liberal Harvard sociologist, saying that's the principal problem that's hollowing out the middle of America. I think when I ran last time, I talked about the Brookings Institute study saying that if you can do 3 things, you'll never be in poverty in America. You work a full-time job, you graduate from high school, not college, high school, and you get married before you have children. You do those 3 things, the poverty rate for people who do those 3 things is like 5%. If you don't do those 3 things, the poverty rate's like 80%. Okay? So we know that all these things work. If we knew that you had an 80% chance to cure cancer if you did those 3 things, we'd cure cancer. But we're doing nothing. Let's just be honest. We are doing absolutely nothing to bring families together. We're doing nothing public policy-wise. We're not even talking about it. And to me, this is not a moral issue. Yeah, is there a moral component? Clearly there is. This is an economic survival. This is a human rights issue for children. What we are doing to children, I encourage you to read Putnam's book and read about the lives of children today living in neighborhoods where there are no dads. It is beyond tragic to see what we let happen to our children in America. And we don't even fight for them. Because, we don't want to be moral. We don't want to impose our values. Ladies and gentlemen, values are being imposed. And so the question is, are we going to step up and fight for those kids? Because it's criminal what we allow happen in America, in American families today. How do you solve that? Some of it is public policy. I mentioned before with respect to low-income families. If you are, I use the example of Wisconsin because it was shared with me when I was up in Wisconsin campaigning 3 years ago. If you are a single mom with 2 children in Wisconsin and you're making $15,000 a year, you receive $38,000 in government benefits. If you get married, you lose all those benefits. And so what's happening? For the first time in the history of our country, a majority of children being born out of wedlock are born in homes where the father is present, but they're not married. Why? Because they can't afford it. Because mom gets more benefits and they're better off economically if they don't get married. We went from a time of shotgun weddings to shotgun no wedding. Okay? Now, is that healthy? Well, Putnam, liberal Harvard sociologist, writes almost zero, it's like 1% of those relationships, children born out of wedlock to a habitating father, less than 1% of those situations end up ever getting married. Back before, it was like 80% got married. Why? Because the government wasn't there saying, don't get married. Because if you get married, then you're going to suffer economically. What can we do about that? I don't have a silver bullet, but we better start talking about what we can do about this. Because it is not fair to trap women in poverty. Trap women. You want to talk about a war on women? Look at that war on women. Look at what we're doing to those women. The man can walk away. He's fine. He walks away, no problem, no obligation. Talk about how many children you have. The mom has to deal with that. That is not fair. That is not a healthy society. It doesn't do that to mothers in our society. But we do. So that's one policy area. But the second thing, and I know I'm out of time, Jan, but I'm going now. But the second thing is, there is something to say about what a president talks about. There is something to say when we say to businesses and communities, you know what, maybe you should start looking at what you can do to create healthier family lives for people in your community and to your churches. For example, we have all sorts of benefits that businesses provide. I'm not saying this is a good idea, but I'm using it for instance. It may be a horrible idea. But do you know any businesses that provide marriage counseling as a free benefit? Or couples counseling as a benefit that they provide in their work? Would that be a bad idea? I'm not saying there should be a federal law that says you should do that. But if you set as a priority, I'll give you an example. Chattanooga, Tennessee. I write about this in a book I wrote many years ago called It Takes a Family. So I've been on this for a while. Chattanooga, Tennessee has this program called First Things First. And they started this program because they found out that Chattanooga had the highest divorce rate, the highest out of wedlock birth rate, the highest, children being raised out of wedlock rate. So they had all of these problems that they didn't know were so what did they do? They formed a nonprofit. They got together with the schools, the business community, the hospitals, the politicians, the media, and they put a campaign together to try to reduce all of these social pathologies. They had billboards up talking about marriage. They had churches that reached out and did a lot more aggressively on marriage counseling and pre-counseling and all that. They had in 3 years they reduced all of these numbers by 25 to 50%. Not a single government dollar, not a single government program. So what we have to do is, look, we all know that America solves problems better not by passing a federal law, but by doing it at the local level with everybody participating in doing it.
Okay, we're going to go into our second round. We're going to begin with you, Mr. Smith, and we are going to keep these answers to 1.5 minutes, so we're going to go to faster pace.
It's a lightning round.
Which Mr. Smith?
That would be you, Al.
That would be you.
Me,
Yeah.
okay. Senator, you had to deal with something in Pennsylvania that fortunately in South Carolina we don't have to deal with a lot, and that's unions. I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing so many jobs being created in South Carolina. You're seeing so much investment come to South Carolina. So I'd like to ask you, what is the role of the modern day union in the United States?
Well, I sort of share a lot of the views of other folks who are running that public employee unions. I don't think there's much of a modern role for I think public employee unions are a stacked deck against the American taxpayer. And I say that, look, my grandfather was a union man. He was a coal miner. He was a treasurer of his union. Why? Well, because when my grandfather came here, he got put in a company town, got paid company stamps, and had to shop at the company store. And he had very little economic leverage, and I probably would have been at his side supporting the opportunity to have a counterbalance at the negotiating table. So as far as private sector unions, historically they had a place at the table. Now probably less so, given the dynamism of what's going on. But the private sector will work itself out. And the question is this new concept of public sector unions. I mean, what was the rationale for public sector unions? If you think about it, I mean, you're not talking about an employer that has a profit motive that's trying to game, or you're talking about people who are county councilmen or whatever the case may be, or mayors who sit across the bargaining table, and their objective is not to crush the union. Their objective is to do something that's in the best interest of the city, including them, who are the taxpayers, who are also the union members. So there really isn't any economic justification for unions being able to negotiate, particularly wages and benefits. Given the fact that these unions negotiate wages and benefits with the people across the table, who then they turn around and support politically with the money that they've gotten that's been negotiated by those very people. So it's a scam. So I applaud Scott Walker and other governors who have done what they've done and taking away that ability. But I think on the private sector side, my sense is, the union movement is dying. I mean, it's not growing. It's going down every single year. And my guess is eventually it will become. It's already insignificant. It'll become even less so over time.
Senator, you recently made comments regarding Bruce Jenner's recent reveal that he's transitioning to become a woman. And you can clarify this, but you essentially seem to say you empathize with him, but you don't agree with his lifestyle choice. It surprised a lot of people, I think, in the interview that he announced that he is a Christian and that he's a Republican as well. And he told Diane Sawyer he felt like he would have a voice with the likes of Mitch McConnell and John Boehner up at Capitol Hill. So in your campaign, because agree with them or not, transsexuals, homosexuals can vote. Do they have a voice in your campaign?
What I've said and what I'll reiterate is, my responsibility is to treat everybody with dignity and respect, period. And what I believe is that if you do that and you respect everybody, you treat people equally, then America's a much better place. I think we have, in general, not specific here, we have too much identity politics going on in America, whether it's racial politics, ethnic politics, gender politics, and that's very divisive. I mean, it's really divisive. I mean, I don't define myself by my ethnicity or by my sexuality or I define myself as an American and as an individual, as I said, who deserves dignity and respect. Why? Because we're made in the image of likeness of God. That's what I believe. And what I think many do is try to divide in order to gain political advantage. And that's harming this country. I wish we could get back to say, what are you? First thing you'd say, I'm an American. Okay? That's first and foremost. I'm an American, right? And not that I'm a hyphenated American, but that I'm an American. And we want the same opportunities for everybody. And if you go back and you look at, I was talking about the Putnam book, he makes the point that in America today, if you are, and it goes back to the underlying family point, Mike, if you're in America today and you're raised in a two-parent family, in a neighborhood of two-parent families, and you go to the school in that neighborhood school, the chances of you succeeding in America are incredibly high, and it doesn't matter your race or ethnicity or your gender. Doesn't matter. It's the same. Same in the other end. Single parent neighborhood, single parent schools, chances of success are very low. Doesn't matter. There is no difference. We keep talking about differences that don't matter from the standpoint of economic opportunity and success in America. And the only reason we do it is for political advantage. And that's wrong, ladies and gentlemen. We need to focus on what the problems are in this country.
Okay, so you've got 7 kids. What does having 7 children teach you about management, discipline, budgeting, and other such skills that directly translate to the White House?
You know, I always say, people say, well, you know, you never ran a business. Well, I actually, in the last 2 years, have ran a small business. I'm the CEO of a faith-based movie company called Echo Light Studios. And that's been a great challenge, navigating the entertainment world. You think people in politics don't tell you the truth? Let me tell you. You know, Hollywood, I mean, no one expects you to tell the truth. That's the amazing thing. There's no expectation that everybody's telling you what's really real. But what I found is, you know, running that company, as I did when I ran, you know, my offices and when I was, is the same skills are the same skills that you develop in the family. I mean, the family you mentioned, they have a budget, they have revenue, they have expenditures. You got human resource development, right? You've got human resource problems. You've got managerial conflicts. I mean, all those things happen in every family in America. And the bigger the family, the better your experience, is what I found. And, you know, I always say, you know, that every child learns differently, every child acts differently, and we've been very, very blessed to have a wealth of experience and a wealth of love. And so I feel like it does actually prepare you. And I would also say the other thing, you know, it's big fan. You know, every time I tell people, you know, I'm in the grocery store line and, you know, I've got a couple of my kids, it doesn't happen as much anymore because they're older. People say, how many kids you have? I'd say 7. And they say, oh, you don't have a television at home? And, yeah. Okay, it'll be a second, you'll get it. You know, and, you know, they'll make all these sort of wisecracks about the size of your family, and it's as if it's some sort of strange thing. And, you know, I think an example of a big being open to life, and obviously not everybody can have a family, and I understand that, but the fact that you're open to life and you're willing to, make the sacrifice. I mean, raising kids, it's a sacrifice. We all know that. I mean, you can't raise children and say, oh, all I care about is me. It doesn't work. And so that kind of sacrificial life as an example out there, I think is a good example. People, you say, what are you going to do in the White House? I said, well, no trips to the Lincoln bedroom, because that'll be one of my kids' bedrooms, not a place to entertain. But just having a big family before the American public, having a little girl with a disability, who most people who are on the other side of the abortion issue would say she should have been aborted. In fact, 90% of those kids are aborted. And to have that person up there for the country and frankly the world to see, I think there's a lesson in that. I mean, there's so much a president does that has nothing to do with the policies. It has everything to do with what he projects that sets a tone and an image. And I think it's important.
Senator, in World War II, Winston Churchill said, never was so much owed to so few by so many. You could say that about the men and women who serve this country today, the ones who go back again and again and again and fight the wars while so many of us stay back home. What promise would you make to your son's classmates at the Citadel to say, when you come home, we'll fix the broken VA and make sure you get the respect and treatment you deserve?
Yeah, this is a very personal issue to me because my parents, I grew up on VA grounds. I lived in government housing my entire life until I was 18 years old, until I went to college. So I lived in a rather small apartment on the grounds. Both my parents worked for the Veterans Administration, and they started working there in the 1950s. That's where they met, got married, and I lived the VA saga up until my parents retired in 1990. And I saw the deterioration of the VA over time. VA medicine used to be the best medicine. After the war, it was the best medicine. And it has deteriorated over time. Why? Because it's a government-run organization. I mean, government doesn't encourage competition. They don't encourage innovation. They just don't. And I can tell you, having lived at a VA post in the 60s and 70s, and seeing the treatment of our Vietnam veterans during that time, people ask me why I became a Republican. I'll be honest with you, because I saw how some at that time were treating our people coming home from the war and treating them and denying them the resources they needed to take care of them. And so I sided with the other side. I mean, against the anti-war and the anti-Vietnam folks. That's how I became initially attached. And so this is a very important issue to me. And the sacrifice that we are asking, tour after tour of duty, in an environment that, yes, people would say, well, it's not like fighting a war, where you're up there against machine gun bullets or whatever firing at you in a front-to-front kind of war. But in many respects, psychologically, this is harder because you never know who your enemy is. You saw American Sniper, and any little kid, any woman with a bomb. I mean, it's psychologically debilitating, and it's when you're fighting someone in uniform across a trench line or other type of line, you know who the enemy is, but when you're walking down the street and you see a little kid, now you flash back, that could be an enemy. It's a very different thing. And so we have to be much more in tune in meeting the needs of these men and women coming back, because they are in much more difficult physical, because why? Because if you got half the injuries that occurred in Iraq, if they occurred in World War II, none of those people wouldn't have come home, they'd have died. But now we are so good in medicine at the front lines that people survive with really horrific injuries. And so we have an extra obligation. And the VA system is broken. In my opinion, it's unfixable. Why? Because it's a government-run bureaucracy. And what I have supported over the years is to allow, I'm not saying abolish the VA system, but what I am saying is we have to allow our men and women who have come back to get the best care at the best place for them. And that's what we should be focused on.
This is going to be our last question. We're out of time.
You've said that the Republican Party hasn't done a good job reaching out to workers. Is that a matter of message or policy?
Yes.
Are there GOP policies and proposals you would scrap as bad for workers?
Well, I wouldn't scrap policies that are bad for. I think in my book, I have a chapter of the book called "A Rising Tide Lifts All Boats." What's that mean? Pro-growth. You're looking at the low growth rates that we have in this country, 2.2% instead of 4%, which it should be, and they lower wages as a result, less employment as a result. There's clearly growth is the right approach. Republicans are right on the issue of a more efficient and pro-growth tax code and regulatory environment, etc. So that they're right, it's just insufficient. And that's the second part of the chapter's title. A rising tide lifts all boats unless your boat has a hole in it. And like it or not, and we talked about this with the family, a higher and higher percentage of American people have holes in their boats, whether it's a lack of education or skills, whether it's drug addiction, alcohol, mental illness. We have a lot of folks who are struggling, and so when they see the NASDAQ hitting highs and they see all these people making billions in the tech world, and yeah, the water's getting higher, but if you have a hole, that means you're just bailing faster because the water's deeper and sinking becomes even more frightening. And so we need to have a message that says, and that's why I talk about the manufacturing piece. That's why I talk about the energy piece as an important part of not just keeping energy prices low for consumers, but low, stable energy prices are a great attraction to manufacturers to come back into this country. That's why I talk about vocational education in our schools and technical and training as a vitally important part. There's no reason that we should abandon vocational education in our schools again. We have a whole generation of Americans who don't know how to use their hands. And that's just not, they don't know how to use tools. Those are kinds of things that working with your head and your hands are really important to do. And so what I would say is we need more of a message. I'll give you another, immigration. I talk about that. That immigration, we brought in over the last 20 years, 35 million people new into this country, 10% addition to this country. Almost all of whom are unskilled. Almost all of whom are unskilled. Obviously, 12 million of those are illegal, and the rest are legal immigrants. Again, almost all unskilled. What does that mean? That means it put pressure on wages. Wages have flattened out over the last several years. Median income is declining in America. Why? Because you have people who are willing to do the same work for less. And no one is talking, except me, talking about changing the legal immigration system in this country to reduce the number of unskilled workers that are coming in so it doesn't disadvantage the American workforce. So those are different messages and different policies that we're laying out there that I think will frankly have a lot of attraction to a lot of those voters and frankly more importantly workers who want hope.
Our panelists for coming today. You all did a wonderful job as always. And ladies and gentlemen, let me finally say thank you so much to our very own Senator Rick Santorum. Thank you.